changes in anti-Semitism after October 7th. While his findings revealed that 56% of Jewish students felt 52% feel also most % of other personal danger as a result of campuses. It's that, quote, different perceptions of intent are likely contributing to those fears. 66% of Jewish students understand the pro-Palestinian protest chant, quote, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, unquote, to mean the expulsion and genocide of Israeli Jews, while only 14% of Muslims understand the chant that way. Dr. Pape believes the underlying fears that are not being addressed are fueling both anti-Semitic and anti-Islamic sentiment on campus. Quote, about 10% of college students would permit student groups to call for genocide against Jews, and about 13% of college students say that when Jews are attacked, it is because they deserve it. When these same about Muslims, we find the same percentages, 10% and 13% respectively. In particular, the findings are an opportunity to recenter the national discussion around students and away from politics. The findings show strong support for calming actions such as major public statements by university and national leaders that would condemn violence of any kind against any group of people. What is your reaction to Professor Pape's research and what you've been doing with your group?
I think your question and his research highlight the importance of this hearing, and I'm grateful to all of you for holding it. It is unacceptable for any students at any university to feel fear or to feel uncomfortable because of who they are. We can't have that in the United States of America. And so if you ask me, are we doing enough? I say we haven't yet done enough, and we are on our way, but we have a way to go. I will just emphasize two other things. First of all, we need consistency. Right? What we do for students, what we do for Muslim students, we need to do for all students. Consistency is at its core what our country is about, and I think sometimes we fall in short there. But we need to focus on that, and we need to protect everyone while also allowing robust debate, because that is the essence of a university.
So, Professor Shizer, in your task force work to combat anti-Semitism, I believe you're also focused on, with your statement about consistency, making sure that all students are safe. Your Muslim students, your Palestinian students are safe. Is that true? Is that accurate?
Absolutely. And I should say our specific mandate is anti-Semitism, but we hope that our recommendations and the ideas we develop with colleagues will be applicable to everyone and will be helpful to everyone.
Well, I'm struck by your comments, your written comments, when you say members of a group that say particular phrases or comments that interfere with their ability to learn and work, should the university defer to them? In recent years, this sort of deference has been commonplace. For instance, when women, black and transgender students have registered concerns in discussions of sexual assault, policing, and transgender rights. But the response has been Jewish students and Israeli students lodged some similar complaints after October 7th. With the time remaining, can you kind of help unpack that a bit more for the committee?
Sure. I'm a conservative. I'm close to many conservative students. There have been times when they've gotten the signal that they should really go slow on a particular event or not articulate a particular position because it makes others feel uncomfortable. And it is striking how that kind of language has not been applied to Jewish students. Jewish students said, we feel uncomfortable. The emphasis has been, no, free speech. Now, I want to be clear. I think free speech is essential, but I also think consistency is essential. We need to have the same approach for everyone.
Thank you. My time is up. I wish I could talk to you more, but I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Takano. Mr. Wahlberg, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the panel for being here. The day after the October 7th attack, Professor Joseph Massad, and I only single him out amongst numerous others that I could single out, because he particularly is a tenured professor and chairs the School of Arts and Sciences Academic Review Committee. He wrote in an article praising, and I quote him, the innovative Palestinian resistance, end quote, for attacking Israel and glorifying Hamas's slaughter of nearly 1,200 Jews as, and I quote again, awesome tenured professor who's been saying these type of things for 20 years. At Columbia. President Shafiq, you recently said, and it is absolutely unacceptable for any member of the Columbia community to promote the use of terror and violence. Do you condemn has he faced any consequences for it?
Congressman, I do condemn his statement. He has been
spoken
and I
to?
should just, and I,
To support of terrorism, if you're a Columbia professor?
and I should say,
He's been spoken to?
I didn't get to fit.
I have your answer.
No.
Let me move on here. Professor Mossad has also been known to have called Israelis, quote, cruel and bloodthirsty colonizers, end quote, and foreigners who joined the Israeli military as, quote, baby-killing Zionist Jewish volunteers for Israeli Jewish supremacy, end quote. In 2005, an investigation by Columbia corroborated allegations that Mossad yelled at a Jewish student who questioned his views to, quote, get out of my classroom. Can you imagine free speech, diversity on campus? Well, let's move it over. Let's intentionally disregard the feelings of a Jewish student as being less than human in this classroom to someone like myself who might be given this to wear to remember and bring home the hostages now, to quietly take it off so my professor wouldn't see it, a professor who holds my academic career in the palm of his hands. That's free speech. That's diversity. President Shafiq, I'm concerned that isn't happening here. So let me ask this question. As the chair of the School of Arts and Sciences academic, Mossad is responsible for, quote, overseeing the periodic review of all departments, centers, and institutes in the school. Do you stand behind Professor Mossad remaining chair of the Academic Review Committee, giving his support for terrorism and harassing Jewish students?
Congressman Walberg, I just want to confirm that when faculty behave in any discriminatory fashion at Columbia,
You talk to him.
there are consequences. No, we take them out of the classroom if necessary.
Is he out of the
remove them
classroom?
from leadership posts if necessary. We allow students to leave those classes if they feel at all uncomfortable.
Is he out of the classroom?
He is, I believe, to answer your question, he is no longer chair of that committee and does not have a leadership role.
But not out of the classroom. Let me move over to the trustees. As trustees, would you approve Professor Mossad for tenure if the decision were before you today of this preeminent institution of diversity, of free thought? And you talk to professors who make horrific statements like, and as I said, I could have asked other professors. You, in fact, even pointed out that there were numerous professors that you're looking at right now. Back.
Walberg, Dr. Nice for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank the witness. That we would be concerned about the safety of Jewish Americans in New York, of all places. Americans have levels of anti-Semitic events since the FBI began monitoring incidents at campuses in both these centers. And as a former professor myself of 40 years, I'll tell you, unacceptable. 73% of Jewish college students have experienced or witnessed some form of anti-Semitism since the beginning of the school year, and only 1/3 of Jewish students felt safe on campuses. I think every student should feel campus that they're studying on. But Mr. Askew, you are co-chair of the task force on anti-Semitism on your campus. How has the task force recognized the unique challenges that Columbia faces in dealing with protests and demonstrations, harassment allegations, and overall threats to segments of the student population while being open campus in one of the largest cities in the world?
It's a critical responsibility, Congresswoman, for exactly the reasons that you described. This is not an acceptable situation. I do want to say there are wonderful things happening at Columbia too, and part of what moves me is how many people have pitched in to make sure that we deal with this problem. But the problem is there and it is not yet fixed. And I will say that our first step was to look at rules for protests, and I am very grateful that our responses have been taken so seriously. And as I said, the university is implementing all of our recommendations, but we're only just getting started. We have another report coming out next month. We've got to look at student orientations. We've got to look at the way we train people who deal with students. We've got to look at the policies for student groups to make sure that people don't get excluded. And then we have more reports that we have in mind for next year, including careful research to get detailed insights into the people who've been victims of this discrimination, because we need to understand it and we need to stop it.
Thank you, sir. So you're expecting recommendations from this? Okay. So Columbia is over 270 years old. That's almost 3 decades, or 3 centuries, actually. And it wasn't until 1873 that Columbia became an integrated institution by allowing its first black student by the name of James R. Priest to enroll, who was also the son of a former slave. Over history, your missions and role have evolved as an institution of higher education. And my question to you is, how do the trustees work to ensure that Columbia remains true to its practice of progress while making sure that it is welcoming and responsive to demographic groups that it was not originally designed to serve? Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
So one of the great privileges of being at a university is a diverse student body, people who come from very different backgrounds, who then meet each other, learn from each other, learn with each other, and we need to be sure that that continues to happen in all the ways that universities do well. And one of the challenges of the recent months is that I think we've fallen short in various ways, but the aspiration is there, and our commitment to be welcoming and also open to everyone.
Thank you. So Ms. Shipman or Mr. Greenwald, would you like to respond? Got 57 seconds.
I agree with Professor Schisser. Bringing diverse people to campus coming from different backgrounds, different places in the country, different places from around the world is enriching to their educational experience.
Okay. Ms. Shipman?
I agree with that, Congresswoman. I would also say that fundamentally our institution has got to be about respect. And that is sorely lacking on our campus right now. And we can have diversity and different points of view, but if people are not listening and they're weaponizing their sentiments, nobody's learning.
Yes, ma'am. Well, certainly the goal should be to ensure that every member of a campus community can reach their full potential without additional burdens of stereotypes and biases and systemic barriers. And I hope that Columbia can take and our universities can take some steps to support students on the ground. With that, Madam Chair, I'm going to yield back. I only have about 6 seconds.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Ms. Stefanik, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My colleague, Rep. Wahlberg's question regarding Professor Joseph Massad. So let me be clear, President, that he was spoken to. Who spoke with him?
He was spoken to by his head of department and his dean.
And what was he told?
I was not in those conversations. I think.
But you're not aware what he was
that
told?
language
What
was
was he told?
unacceptable.
What was he told?
That language was unacceptable.
And were there any other enforcement actions taken? Any other disciplinary actions taken?
In his case, He has not repeated anything like that ever since.
Does he
I
need
would
to
say-
repeat stating that the massacre of Israeli civilians was awesome? Does he need to repeat his participation in an unauthorized pro-Hamas demonstration on April 4th? You know, Professor David Scheiser talked about Skizzer, the lack of enforcement. Do you agree that this is an issue with a lack of enforcement? When the policy of Columbia specifically stated on April 5th said, I want to make clear that it is absolutely unacceptable for any member of this community to promote the use of terror or violence, and yet you have no action, no disciplinary action. Do you agree with how the university has handled this?
Yeah, we have 4,700 faculty at Columbia, most of whom spend all of their time dedicated to teaching their students.
But I'm talking about the faculty members who are supporting terror, and it's not just that case. Let me bring your attention to Muhammad Abdu, who was hired after the October 7th terrorist attack against Israel. He, on October 11th, posted, yes, I'm with Hamas and Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad. He also decried false reports accusing Arabs and Muslims of decapitating the heads of children and being rapists. We know that there were decapitations of babies, of innocent Israeli citizens, of seniors, of women. There were rapes. And yet, Columbia, this individual as a professor. How did that hiring process work? Were you aware of those statements before the hiring?
I share with you your repugnance at those remarks. I completely understand that. On my watch, faculty who make remarks that cross the line in terms of anti-Semitism, there will be consequences for them.
What are the consequences
I have
in this
five
case?
cases at the moment who have either been either taken out of the classroom or dismissed.
And is he one of those?
He will never work at Columbia again.
So he has been terminated?
He has been terminated. And not just terminated, but his files will show that he will never work at Columbia again.
So he's currently not employed by Columbia?
He is grading his students' papers and will never teach at Columbia again, and that will be on his permanent
How
record.
are you changing the hiring processes? Because on your watch, he was hired after he made these statements publicly. How are you ensuring this does not happen with your hiring process moving forward?
So when we hire people, obviously they have to meet the academic qualifications, but we do an employment check and a criminal record check. We also ask everyone to do an attestation that they have never been accused of discrimination or part of an investigation around harassment or discrimination. And that attestation has to be signed by all new employees.
And it didn't work in this case?
I think in this case, well, he may not have been subject to an investigation on discrimination or found guilty. It has to be found guilty.
But don't you think it's a problem
qualified.
when the hiring process of Columbia is hiring someone who makes those statements and
I
they hire
agree
him
with you.
after making those statements?
I agree with you that I think we need to look at how to toughen up those requirements. We do have a requirement, but I agree with you. I think we need to look at how we can make them
Let me
more
ask about
effective.
Professor Catherine Frank from the Columbia Law School, who said that all Israeli students who have served in the IDF are dangerous and shouldn't be on campus. What disciplinary action has been taken against that professor?
I agree with you that those comments are completely unacceptable and discriminatory.
But I'm asking you what disciplinary action has been taken.
She has been spoken to by a very senior person in the administration, and she has said that that was not what she intended to say.
And has she publicly apologized?
I have suggested that.
You have suggested that? Has she done that?
I think to clarify her position.
You see the concern here, though, with the lack of enforcement. You see the concern that speaking to these professors is not enough, and it's sending a message across the university that this is tolerated, these anti-Semitic statements from a position of authority in professors in the classroom is tolerated. My time has expired, but I will have multiple rounds of questions. I yield back.
Ms. Manning, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Professor Shafiq, I understand that all Columbia students go through an orientation that includes anti-discrimination training. Does that training include comprehensive education about anti-Semitism, including the central role Israel plays in Judaism?
Thank you for that question. In the past, that was not the case, and that is something we are actively working on.
But is that taking place right now?
We have trained our student affairs staff across Columbia, but
I think time is of the essence, and I hope you will commit to getting that training in place immediately.
Yes, it is being put in place now for our incoming class.
Okay. The report issued by your task force on anti-Semitism says that discrimination and harassment are not protected speech. We have seen chants at Columbia calling to globalize the Intifada, and much worse. During the Intifada, Palestinian suicide bombers blew up Israelis on city buses, at restaurants, even at weddings. And in fact, Columbia alum Sarah Duker was killed in a bus bombing in Jerusalem in 1996. Given this history, are calls to globalize the Intifada acceptable at Columbia?
So
Just a yes or no answer, please.
I personally find it unacceptable. Our current rules have not specified that as not acceptable, but we have sent a very clear message to our community that that kind of language is unacceptable.
I certainly hope you will rectify that in your statements. The task force report also states that anti-Semitism includes efforts to rationalize or endorse the murder of Jews or the destruction of the state of Israel. And I'd like to submit for the record an article written by Professor Joseph Massad that rationalizes the murder of Jews and the destruction of the state of Israel. Why is that professor still teaching at Columbia?
As I said, we have mechanisms in place where faculty cross the line. We have many cases, and when we have any complaints from students saying they feel uncomfortable, there are disciplinary processes in place.
Is he still teaching?
He is still on the faculty.
Is he still teaching?
I'm not. I don't want to misspeak. I'm not sure he's teaching at the moment.
The task force report also states that the mission of a great university requires uncompromising rigor in uncovering facts and analyzing ideas. Now, the article that I just asked to be submitted to the record demonstrates that this professor has an extreme one-sided view of the long-standing conflict in the Middle East, which views Israel as illegitimate and any attempt to destroy Israelis as legitimate. Is teaching this one-sided view of the conflict in the Middle East in line with your mission to educate your students with uncompromising rigor in uncovering facts and analyzing ideas?
Our objective is to give students a broad exposure to many ideas. We have about 50 courses at the moment which cover Israeli and Jewish studies, the Middle East, and it's important that they be exposed to all of those views.
But no one student can take all 50 courses. Is there an effort to make sure that both sides, of course I don't agree that the murder of Jews and the destruction of Israel is a side that should be taught, but are there, for example, any professors in your Middle East Studies department who believe that Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state?
In fact, the head of that department is an Israeli. And
that doesn't answer my question.
No, and we have many faculty at Columbia who clearly would take that view. I should also say that most of these courses are electives and students can choose which professors they want to study with. But I would, obviously we want them to have a broader range of views.
So I am worried about how we get at the underlying issue that there is such anti-Semitism on your college campus. Now, step one is to make sure that there is rigorous anti-Semitism training in your anti-discrimination course that all your students are supposed to take. Step two is having that same training for your faculty members.
Yes.
And step three is making sure that your Middle East Studies department does not foment anti-Semitism by teaching that Israel is illegitimate as a state, and that Jews should be murdered to get rid of Israel. Is that a problem?
Congresswoman, I agree with you. We are in active discussions with Ted Deutsch of the American Jewish Congress on the kinds of educational programs that they have developed, and we are looking at how we can integrate them. We've done some of that already with our student affairs staff, and we are working with the Anti-Semitism
I
Task
believe
Force
you
to
have
see
a
how to do
core
it for next
curriculum
year.
at Columbia. I suggest you insert that. And I'd like to close by asking that a statement by my colleague, Representative Richie Torres, also be entered into the record. With that, my time has expired, and I yield back.
Without objection, the material the gentlewoman asked to be put in the record will be placed in the record. Mr. Grossman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I'll yield to Representative Stefanik for a question. I'll yield to Representative Stefanik for a question.
Just to follow up, you should know this, President Shafiq, but Mossad is still, in fact, listed on the Columbia website as chair of the Academic Review Committee. Are you aware of that?
I would need to check that. I don't want to
It's the
misstate.
website's
I
right
don't want
here.
to misstate because
So he hasn't been removed as chair.
I would like to
Do you have
confirm
my
that to
commitment
you.
he'll be removed as chair today?
I have my commitment that I will come back to you and give you the facts.
So he
first.
hasn't been removed. So you said in front of Congress under oath
No, I
that
said I am not sure.
he
I
was
need to check.
removed. Well, I'll tell you
I
what,
need to
he's still listed on chair. Let me ask the Board of Trustees, is that acceptable that he's chair of this committee? Should he be removed today? Ms. Shipman.
Congresswoman, you've put your finger on one of the hardest issues we, as board chairs, face right now. I think you can see our systems, from the videos you played, everything you're talking about, our systems of rules and enforcement
Are broken. They're broken.
We have worked tirelessly
My
to attempt
question to you, Ms. Shipman, and I'm the one asking the questions here as a United States member of Congress, is do you believe that he should be removed as chair? Because currently he's listed as chair on Columbia University's website.
I don't believe any professor at Columbia should say anything like what our professors have to be held to a higher standard than our students. And I can tell you that
But you
our board,
can't say at this hearing that he should be removed as chair, even though he violates university
I
rules.
would not want him as chair. And we are looking at the issue of faculty and what
Mr.
we
Greenwald,
expect
do you
from our
think he should be
faculty
removed as
in
chair?
June.
His comments are abhorrent, and I believe that one of the steps that we could take in terms of discipline is to remove him from that leadership position.
Thank you for that direct answer. And just to let you know, Mr. Abdu is not grading papers right now. He's on campus at the unsanctioned anti-Israel, anti-Semitic event that is being supported by pro-Hamas activists on campus. So that's what Professor Abdu is doing at this very moment. I'll give you back your time.
Okay. A Jewish member of the School of Social Work's faculty told the New York Times, quote, "When Jews speak up in our school, they are met with, 'You have white privilege, so shut up, you're a colonizer, you're an oppressor, you are reprehensible for the deaths of innocent Palestinians.'" You want to comment on that? And then I'll give you comment on that. And how can you get this sort of rhetoric out of your faculty?
I find those remarks reprehensible, and I
How
would
does
not
this
agree
happen?
with them.
That's not the question. They're obviously indefensible. What is going on here? You guys talk about diversity. How in the world does this happen?
Congressman, there are 4,700 faculty at Columbia. Are
Speak up.
doing an 1,700 faculty. Most are dedicated.
Here's what I think the gist of the problem is. You guys talk about diversity. Could you give me a ballpark, School of Social Work, or your faculty across the board of your law school? How many you think are more on the Republican-leaning side, and how many are the Democrat-leaning side?
I am personally incredibly committed to
Pardon?
viewpoint diversity. I am personally incredibly committed to viewpoint diversity, and is one of the things that I want to bring to Columbia. I do not know the answer to that because we don't
Ballpark.
ask people. I honestly can't answer that because
How many, do you
not-
just in your own mind, could you rattle off like 10 Republican-ish faculty out of your 4,000 off the top of your head?
Yeah, I could actually, but I did an event just last week with Joe Stiglitz, who's an economist, who's a Democrat, and Glenn Hubbard, who is a Republican. We have two of our fellows from our Institute for Global Politics who are former Trump administration
Let me give you another
officials.
question. On December 6th, the student group Columbia Social Workers for Palestine held disruptive pro-terrorism teach-in inside the school's lobby, in which they said on October 7th, the Palestinian liberation fighters demonstrated their refusal to be dominated and called their effort a heroic struggle for libertation. Dean Melissa Begg initially canceled the event, because of its advertising, but later she changed her mind and decided to have the event. Were any of these students disciplined, or what type of message do you think that sent?
I believe some of those those students were identified, and they went through a disciplinary process.
According to a current student, on October 10th, a request by Jewish students to the DEI office to designate a room to grieve the mass murder of Jews, something that should be perfunctorily agreed. Concern about the optics, given the lack of a similar room for Palestinian students, was it inappropriate to deny Jewish students their request? You think they should have been given that room or not?
Sorry, I couldn't hear exactly. Deny them access the room that they requested to book? Is that the question?
You got to speak
Yes,
up.
I believe, yes. I think they should have been allowed, and I believe that was corrected later.
Why didn't you aim for a little more
Mr.
ideological diversity on your campus?
Mr. Grossman,
I have a
your
question.
time is up. Mr. Sablon, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome to the witnesses and to everybody in this room. I have a question. Well, anti-Semitism exists. We know it's a problem. It's a major problem. Islamophobia exists. It's a major problem. You know, all kinds of different. But you at Columbia, you know it exists, right? Any one of you. Anti-Semitism is a problem at your school. Yes.
Yes.
It's a problem in many other schools and in many other places in the nation and in the world.
Yes.
At Columbia, you are all working to try as much as possible to fix this problem, right? That's what I gather from all of you today. Am I
We
correct?
are. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, I've been here 16 years. I'm not that long, but there's a trick here in hearings where I ask you a question, and before you give me an answer, I throw in another question. So, Dr. Shafiq, is there some things you would like to say when you were so unceremoniously cut off from giving an answer to questions you were asked by United States members of Congress? Please.
I guess what I'd say is I am personally very committed to viewpoint diversity at Columbia, and I'm very personally committed to making sure that our faculty do not cross the line in terms of discrimination and harassment. We have mechanisms that are now being enforced, and on my watch, they will be enforced. I think many of these appointments were made in the past in a different era, and that era is done.
All right. Professor Shafir, do you have anything to add, sir, to what you have been asked already?
At the moment, no.
No, nobody cut you off. Great. Ms. Shipman, I know somebody cut you off. You have something to add?
These are all legitimate questions. I understand the urgency, and I appreciate that we're here.
Okay, you don't. No, Mr. Greenwald, sir?
Nothing else at the moment.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for being here, expecting all of these things, but I can see that you are all aware of the issue. You're working towards the issue. I don't know if what you guys figure out to do as your policy in Columbia University will be a policy we can copy and fix all the problems we have in the world. This is an ancient problem, like Ms. Shipman said. It will take time and effort to fix it. Just as, we still have to fix women's rights, human rights, employee, everything. So many things. But at Columbia, I am confident, I am convinced that you guys know the problem exists and that you are trying to do something to fix it. And for that, I yield the remainder of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sablon. Mr. Allen, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Well, as you can see, I think the concern is unanimous. We've all been troubled by anti-Semitic activities occurring at your campus and around the country and around the world. As the oldest and most established democracy in the region, Israel exemplifies the core values of freedom and democracy. In fact, I tell my colleagues that Washington, D.C. is not the center of the universe. Jerusalem is the center of the universe. In fact, I read and research that you have a undergraduate and graduate degree School of Religion at Columbia University. Is that correct?
We have affiliated institutions, Union Theological Seminary and the Jewish Theological Seminary, as well as a Department of Religion at Columbia.
All right. In that degree program, I didn't research exactly what you teach, but are you familiar with Genesis 12:3?
Probably not as well as you are, Congressman.
Well, it's pretty clear. It was the covenant that God made with Abraham. And that covenant was real clear. If you bless Israel, I will bless you. If you curse Israel, I will curse you. And then in the New Testament, it was confirmed that all nations would be blessed through you. So you do not know about that.
I have heard that. Now that you've explained it, yes, I have heard that
it's
before.
now familiar. Do you consider that a serious issue? I mean, do you want Columbia University to be cursed by God of the Bible?
Definitely not.
Okay. Well, that's good. So here's the deal. We got freedom of speech in this country and freedom of religion. Yet we also have Moses looking down on the entire body of Congress who gave us the law, which most of our laws were made and are supposed to be enforced, came from the original law. And what we have today is a lawless land. We have lawless universities that are overrun by people who are threatening to kill other students, who are attacking other students, and creating fear in this country. And we have a constitution that requires us to treat other folks as we would like to be treated, which is also in the New Testament. I mean, maybe you should have a course, and you don't have to believe it, but the Bible is an incredible book. There's a lot of history there, and you don't have to believe it, but you need to know what's in there. Maybe you should have a course suggested for those who are having problems with all of this on the Bible and what's in the Bible and kind of what will happen if, under the wrath of God. I mean, we have above the American flag in our chamber, "In God We Trust." I mean, what God is that? Do you understand why we're here? This is a serious issue. Would any of the other board care to, what do you know about this issue, and how do you feel about it? I mean, what are your feelings on what young people are being indoctrinated by these professors to believe this stuff, and they have no idea that they're going to be cursed by God, the God of the Bible, and the God over our flag. What are your thoughts?
Congressman, my thoughts are that you are right that we have a moral crisis on our campus. And I find, as I've said, you're probably tired of hearing it, I find the behavior of some of our students, some of our faculty, unacceptable. And I think we have a variety of tools to deal with it. We have to be able to have rules that make sense. We have to be able to enforce them because people learn from consequences. We have to have order. And then we need deep anti-Semitism training, as we heard the Congresswoman talk. This is essential. We must train people on what this is. And finally,
I'm just about out of time,
we need
but you need to know
education.
That also, education is important, knowledge is important, but the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Ms. Stevens, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Dr. Shafiq, is it safe to say that 99% of your students are over the age of 18? Do you happen to know how many are under the age of 18?
Yes, that is safe to say.
So we've got the undergrads, we've got the graduates, we have adult students, and I'm in the minority party, so we didn't have a ton of say in who was participating in today's hearing, and we've had several hearings about rising anti-Semitism and abhorrent anti-Semitism, and I see that there are students in this audience and there are students outside this committee room, and your voices are entirely important here, and your lived experience is very important. I certainly have the where were you on 10/7 moment. I was with Jewish constituents at home when I was seeing this war unfold and the horrors unfold. And my immediate thought was, oh dear, our college campuses are going to erupt. I have been a member of Congress who's been very dedicated to the Jewish student experience and the protection of it. And we are, throughout this country, tragically and alarmingly at a boiling point as it pertains to anti-Semitism on college campuses. And to every single person in this room wearing the kippah, who is a Jewish student, who stands alongside Israel and fellow Jewish Americans, you belong. And you have a safe space here in the Congress, and you deserve to have a safe space on your campus. I personally had no thought of ever applying to Columbia or any of these other fancy universities that were coming to our committee to talk about what's going on. But I think we'd be having a much better hearing if we had students here. I had the privilege of talking to a Columbia Jewish student just yesterday, and what he shared with me was unbelievable. I don't know what's going on with you all in the administration, frankly. You have a D report card from the ADL. I hear you that you say these things are terrible, and yet they're happening. So the message to the students, and I was an anti-war protester in college myself. I was there when we went into Iraq. I did not want to see us do that. But you cannot call out war while calling out the death and destruction of another group of people. You cannot do that. So, protests and events, they get unwieldy. I'm an elected official. I have town halls and all this and that, and we understand what happens. But let's be really clear here about human dignity and where we are going. We have a vote that we are taking in the next day or two, a resolution on condemning Iran's attacks on Israel. Again, it's from the majority party. I'd like to, as a Congress, be having more nuanced conversations and protections. I come from a very diverse, beautiful place in this country, and I listen and I hear from all of my constituents all over. But where and how are we going to stand up if we're against war and we're against death and destruction here as a Congress? We've got to take responsible votes. And so to the students, I think that's how I want to use my time. I want to see Columbia and all these other places that are failing on their ADL report card to improve. We've got to improve, and we've got a responsibility to improve. We're doing it in the Congress. We employ young people here. We have interns here. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Mr. Banks, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
President Shafiq, I understand you're very proud of the Columbia University School of Social Work, right?
Yeah, it's the oldest social work school in the country.
Yeah. So can you define for us the word Ashke normativity?
I am not familiar with that term. I believe it appeared in a student glossary that was prepared by a group of students.
It appears in the orientation guidebook that's given to all of the students at the School of Social Work, but you can't define it for us?
No, I'm saying I'm not.
You seem to be familiar.
I don't use that term. I don't know that term. I believe that glossary was prepared by students for other students. I don't think it's a part.
But it's handed out. You agree? It's handed out to all of the students who at the I mean, that's what it is. It's the orientation glossary of terms for incoming students at the School of Social Work. So
I don't think it's a product of the School of Social Work. I think a group of students put this together.
It's handed out to students at the School of Social Work. Let me read to you how Ashka normativity is defined by your. You don't know if it comes from students or professors of the school, but Ashka normativity is defined as a system of oppression that favors white Jewish folks, based on the assumption that all Jewish folks are Ashkenazi or from Western Europe. So do you have a response to that definition of Ashke normativity? Is that appropriate? This is handed out to your students.
By other students. It is not a product of the faculty of Columbia University.
It is handed out to your students. Obviously, you allow this to be handed out to your students. Is that appropriate?
As I said, it is not a product of the faculty or the administration. It is something that a group of students produced. I don't agree with it. I think it's not very useful. I don't condone it.
Okay, can you help me understand something else? I didn't go to an Ivy League school, admittedly. Can you explain why the word folks is spelled F-O-L-X throughout this guidebook and in other places at the School of Social Work? What does that mean? Serious question.
They don't know how to spell? I mean, I'm not familiar with that spelling.
I'm not. I don't find it a laughing matter.
No, I'm not laughing either. I think it's.
You're denying that this is a official product of the school, but this is handed out to all of you. You are aware that it's handed out to all of your students, and you're not doing anything to stop it.
As I said, it's not an official product of the administration.
Is this how Columbia University spells the word folks?
No.
Okay. And does Columbia University recognize the word? Because it's not found in the Webster's dictionary or anywhere else, Ashke normativity. Right. Is that an acceptable term at Columbia University?
Congressman, I am with you. I agree with you that I don't find this a meaningful way of.
This is handed out on your watch.
As I said, this is not a product of Columbia University faculty.
The board of trustees. So. Is this appropriate? Either one of you?
That term is shockingly offensive.
It's ridiculous.
Congressman.
Ma'am?
We had discussions about that memo on the board, and my understanding is that we have asked that anything that is looking as though it's orientation materials in any way be run by the dean, and I think that is the agreement. As President Shafiq has said, we're not going to be able to limit what individual students say to each other. We don't like it. It's not the kind of learning we promote at Columbia, obviously.
But you understand how this fosters an environment of anti-Semitism when the president even admits that she doesn't know if this is an official document of the school or written by students, but it's still allowed to be handed out to your students. It's outrageous. And it's the reason that we hold this hearing. It fosters an environment of anti-Semitism at your university. President, are you going to stop this from being handed out again to incoming students at the orientation of the School of Social Work?
We will make sure that it is not part of any orientation process that the university
President,
runs.
Shafiq, can you name a real-world example of a system of oppression that favors white Jewish folks? Can you give us an example?
No.
Do you believe that white Jewish folks are privileged, that they're oppressors?
No.
Do you believe that?
No.
This is what's being fed to your students. It's despicable. You haven't done anything about it. You should do something about it. I yield back.
Thank you. If this is a document produced by the students, I'd be interested in knowing if Columbia is paying for this document to be produced, to be distributed. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, and thank you to the witnesses for joining us today. The anti-Semitism experienced by Jewish students at Columbia University and universities across the country is unacceptable. I've met with several Jewish students from, not several, but lots of Jewish students from across the country who've endured a wave of slurs and threats, and my heart breaks each time I hear those stories, which I think it breaks for everybody on this committee and on the panel. But anti-Semitism is a centuries-old form of hatred rooted in white supremacy. It's also a form of hatred that has sadly been stoked and given a platform by some in the Republican Party. Madam Chair, I'd like unanimous consent to enter into the record the article from Politico titled, open quote, Donald Trump dined with white nationalist Holocaust denier Nick Fuentes.
Without objection.
In case we don't remember President Trump's remarks after the anti-Semitic white nationalist rally in Charlottesville in 2017, Madam Chair, I'd like unanimous consent to enter into the record the article from The Atlantic titled, open quote, Trump defends white nationalist protesters. Some very fine people on both sides, close quote.
Without objection.
This committee has held 3 hearings on anti-Semitism on college campuses, but not one of these hearings has considered a bill to actually address the scourge of anti-Semitism. In fact, last fall, House Republicans proposed a 25% budget cut to the office that's actually investigating and can take action against universities if there is anti-Semitism on campuses that is actionable. The committee could be more productive on this issue and hold a hearing on Congresswoman Manning's bipartisan, bicameral bill, H.R. 7921, the Countering Anti-Semitism Act. The bill would designate a senior official at the Department of Education to counter anti-Semitism on college campuses, among other solutions, provide data, get us the information we need so we can actually take action, because we must do more than complain. We need to take action. We need to actually have solutions. Dr. Scheiser, as co-chair of Columbia's Task Force on Anti-Semitism, would you support the kind of legislation that gives us more data and a mechanism to fight anti-Semitism?
Data is critical because we need to know more about the issues that we're addressing. And I've seen Congresswoman Manning's bill, and I think it is very well crafted.
Thank you. It has lots of provisions that actually would assist with the issues that we've heard about today. I'd also point out that anti-Semitism isn't the only form of hatred rising in our schools. It's not the only form of hatred that is impacting our children's or students' ability to learn. Islamophobia and hate crimes against LGBTQ students have also recently spiked. They've led to deaths by suicide, harassment, but this committee has not held a single hearing on these issues. The rise in hatred across the United States is not good for learning. It's bad for democracy. We need to find a way to heal and have our students and have our entire nation understand that we are indeed one nation under God, different forms of gods that we worship. But that when we can come to understand each other as related and as connected and respect each other and not tear each other down, that is when we truly start learning to prosper and thrive. And I look forward to working on the kinds of solutions that get us to this point. I hope this committee can be part of the solutions. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Owens, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Back in December, I made a statement that I've seen this movie before, and that seems like it's not changed. I grew up in the Deep South, 1960s, days of KKK, Jim Crow, and segregation. My first exposure to white Americans wasn't until I was 16 years old. I was one of 4 black athletes, integrated formerly all-white high school, and remember vividly the morning after Martin Luther King's assassination, walking to our high school courtyard and seeing spray painted on the wall in red, "Ding dong, the king is dead." Let's fast forward to the experience of 2024. If I came to Columbia campus, what would be the response if members of my race were harassed by KKK bigots, mocked, called an N-word, spit upon, hit with a stick, ostracized? Would these same bigots and racists be allowed to protest at Columbia's campus spewing anti-black hate speech. And instead of wearing the white KKK hoods, would these cowards be granted free speech status as they hid their faces behind black masks and full head scarves? At a total cost of $90,000 per year, would black students be forced to attend the class of a tenured Columbia professor while discussing the past events of a massacre of black men and women and children, black girls being raped and black men being lynched, and would speak in glowing terms of this event as stunning, awesome, and astonishing? President, I'd like to ask you, would this treatment of black Americans be tolerated for 1 second?
What you've described, Congressman, is completely unacceptable. I, too, grew up in the South in the 1960s and share that experience.
So yes or no, would this be tolerated for 1 second?
I beg your pardon?
Would this be tolerated, this treatment of black Americans, for 1 second on Columbia's campus?
Absolutely not. And
okay. I just want to continue this, because if this would not be tolerated for blacks, why has it been for months and years? We're talking about a professor who goes back 20 years now. This guy has been around a long time. So why is it that Jewish Americans can then be treated by these bigots and bullies in this manner?
It is not tolerated, and it is not acceptable. And over the last 6 months, we have done everything we can and have worked tirelessly to improve our policies.
Okay, let me just say this real quickly. Let me tell you why I think these two standards are prevalent. At Columbia's the core teaching values are DEI and CRT, which are racist and anti-Semitic teachings of Marxism. The racist beliefs are the blacks are hopeless, weak, and oppressed race that needs protection and pity of the white race. Anti-Semitic beliefs are the Jewish race are the oppressor race, and that all minorities need to be protection from them and therefore hated. If you ever wonder why the heinous crimes of October 7th never moved the needle of empathy at Columbia, this is why. I personally think that it takes a true lowlife, repugnant human being to make the statement that the massacre of innocent men and women and children, the raping of girls, the beheading of children, the burning alive of human beings was stunning, awesome, and astonishing. But what truly speaks volumes is the moral compass of Columbia, that this rabid anti-Semite is still on your payroll today. He's gotten cocky, and for 20 years he's done the same thing. It's just a little tip of the iceberg of what's going on there and what's being taught in our classes. There's a statement from a Jewish student. It is impossible to exist as a Jewish student at Columbia without running face first into anti-Semitism every single day. Jew hatred is so deeply embedded into the campus culture that it's become casual among students, faculty, and neglected by administrators. Do you agree with this statement, President?
I have met those students and heard those words in the listening sessions that I've been holding. I believe in leadership by presence and walking around. It is distressed.
To cut you off, I just have a few seconds here. Let me tell you what major concerns. There's thousands of Columbia students coming from countries that hate America and the other democracy in that region, Israel. How does this work? International students paying a total of $90,000 a year up front, skip classes to demonstrate, bully Americans, burn American flags, stop traffic in our countries as they shout death to America. In some kind of way, they still get a degree. I think most of us, unless they're genius, most of us spend 100% of our time trying to pass our courses, particularly $90,000 per year. I'm running out of time. I'll just say this. I'd like to know how many of these folks are actually graduating and what the degrees are and how they're getting paid to come to our campus and bully our kids the way they are right now. And with that, I'd like to yield back.
Thank you. Mrs. Hayes, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to start before I get into my questions by saying that I am a woman of deep personal faith, and my faith forces me to respect the faith of others. So the injection of biblical theology into this committee hearing is inappropriate. But if we were to talk about that, I would say that my faith is used as a shield to protect others, and not a sword to hate or harm others. I guess I call myself a Matthew 25 Christian. But there's a few things that I would like to witnesses clear up before I get into my questions. Professor Shizer, my colleagues suggest getting away with on campus. Can you clarify when the student, and does the university take action in those matters?
The university has to take action in those matters.
Thank you. Dr. Shafiq, it's my understanding that the committee was told yesterday that Professor Massad is under investigation. Is that correct?
I think I would like to confirm that in writing, if you don't.
I can't hear your answer.
I said I would like to confirm that in writing.
And can you also clarify that he no longer holds a leadership position?
I would like to confirm that in writing. And I'm happy to follow up with the committee on that matter.
Thank you. Can you get those things to the committee as soon as this concludes?
Absolutely.
I would appreciate that. There's no place for discrimination in education. No place at all. It should be the goal of all institutions at every level to create safe environments for students, free from harassment and violence. The rise in anti-Semitism on college campuses is unacceptable. According to the ADL, who released data yesterday, 2023 was the worst year for anti-Semitic incidents since the ADL began recording more than 4 decades ago. There were 8,873 incidents reported across the United States in 2023, an increase of 140% compared to 2022, which was also a record-setting year. According to that same report, Connecticut saw a 170% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in 2023. Islamophobia and anti-Muslim sentiments have also increased on college campuses. I applaud the Biden administration for releasing the national strategy to counter anti-Semitism and the investigations by the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights for Anti-Semitism at Higher Education Institutes. This is not a problem that any one person or one group can solve, and we should be working here today on solutions. It is equally as important for school administrators to change the culture on their campuses. President Sharif, in your testimony, you stated that in October 2023, you quickly formed a task force. In the March 2024 report, the task force made a series of recommendations that we heard today. Can you tell us, has Columbia University begun to implement any of the recommendations made by the task force? And if so, what are they?
Yes, we have. In fact, our new demonstration policy was endorsed by the task force, and they had input into the idea of basically setting aside space where demonstrations can happen so students who don't want to hear words don't have to hear them, and that is already now implemented. Are there any enforcement mechanisms for those policies? Yes, if students don't adhere to those rules, the demonstration policy outlines a series of disciplinary measures that would result.
Thank you. And I know that there's a challenge of creating rules that appropriately distinguish between free speech and hate speech. But can you tell me what impact would an increase in funding have on the department's ability to respond to the rise in anti-Semitism? You heard my colleagues say that funding that does specifically this has been cut.
Is that to me?
Yes. I'm sorry.
Yes, we would. We know that there's a number of cases before the Department of Education around these issues. We would welcome guidance from the Department of Education as we try and define the boundaries, particularly around speech. So it would be helpful. But guidance
without money will not help you achieve these goals.
Yeah, it would be helpful, I think, from our perspective, to get such information.
Thank you. I have no further questions. I yield back.
Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. Mr. Good, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll direct this first to Dr. Shafiq. What does it say about College Columbia's today that we're sitting here having a congressional hearing to discuss significant anti-Semitism prevalent to a large degree on campuses like yours, and pro-terrorism sympathies on campuses like yours? How troubling is that to you? What does it say about our college campuses today that we're here doing this?
I am very troubled. I would say that we have 37,000 students, and I think the numbers that we are talking about who are crossing these lines are, a very, very small number.
Okay, let me stop you there. Let me stop you there. Have there been any anti-Islamic demonstrations on campus? Any anti-Muslim demonstrations on campus? Any anti-Arab demonstrations? Anything like that happened?
There have been pro-Israeli demonstrations.
That's not what I asked you.
But there have, there have been many incidents.
The answer would be no, correct?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
There would be
to the board
incidents.
members, if I may say about our college campuses today, that we're having a hearing about anti-Semitic sympathies on campus, expressions on campus on a large scale, and pro-terrorist expressions on campus on a significant scale. What does that say about college campuses today like Columbia's? Anyone want to answer that?
Congressman, I think it says we have a lot of work to do. It's shocking.
What does it say about what's happening on our college campuses that this would even be an issue to such large degree that we're holding yet another congressional hearing on this subject?
I think, personally, I think it says that we have lost our way in terms of what we expect from each other in a learning community and in our society. I think we have got to learn to listen to all sorts of diversity, and we have to commit to speech that isn't laced with hate and isn't just meant to provoke for
Right. Thank you very much. Appreciate your efforts to try to answer that. President Shafiq, as you know, on March 24, just 3 weeks ago, and 5 months after the October 7 terrorist attack in Israel, a coalition of a reported 94 Columbia student organizations led by Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Force for Peace held an event with guest speakers who are connected to and supportive of known terrorist organizations. Khalid Barakat spoke at the event. He's been identified as a member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a group that the United States, has designated a foreign terrorist organization. Another speaker who's affiliated with the Palestine Solidarity Network, which is designated as a terrorist group by Israel. Does it say that we take place on campus, held on, say about Columbia today?
Allow that event, host that event. It twice said no. They then tried to host it. They then dorm room. Immediately, as soon as we notified the FBI, we brought in special investigators, and we
let me stop you there.
suspended the students
When did you
involved.
learn it was going to take place, or was being tried to be held to take place?
We learned on the day, and then we immediately contacted the FBI.
Were any safe spaces provided or other supportive measures created for students who might have felt threatened by the efforts to have this on campus, to have these speakers speaking remotely, at least on campus? Was there any measures taken for those students who might have felt threatened by this?
They were in a private space, and as I said, all of the students who were involved in organizing that event have been suspended.
All right, one of the primary organizer of the event was the Students for Justice in Palestine, which was suspended on November 10, but that was 4 months before the event took place. How could they be able to organize an event on campus? What's the criteria for approval or disapproval to be able to do that?
So we were one of the first universities to suspend Students for Justice in Palestine, and
able to hold an event
because they didn't abide by our rules and held unsanctioned events. We quickly realized, I think that was a very powerful symbol to say if student groups don't abide by the rules, there will be consequences for them.
I'm sorry, with 8 seconds left, I'm going to have to stop you. The Columbia University newspaper contained an op-ed from the Columbia University Apartheid Divest signed by 94 supporting student groups that were part of the coalition with Students for Palestine that organized the event. I would response afterwards in writing as to whether or not these groups who were also supported, the other 94 groups, whether or not they would have been suspended or have funds pulled or any consequence of those other 94 groups, as reported in the Columbia University newspaper. Apologize, Madam Chairman, for going over a little bit. I yield back.
Thank you. Your request to have an answer is duly noted. Mr. DeSanya, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank all the witnesses. Ms. Shipman, I was taken by your comment about when you were a young person and went to Columbia from the Midwest, that you were taught how to think, not what to think. And in that context, we're dealing with a complex issue, historically, thousands of years. In this instance, but the use of technology and political consultants is quite remarkable, where you have a real legitimate, and I appreciate the bipartisan focusing on the legitimate issues around hatred and prejudice. So, but the technology to me is really fascinating. What makes this so unique to our time in this institution? Professor, have you looked at that in terms of social media and how we are? There's a lot of work around this in this field, not in this specific field, by research. Harvard, I think it's Susan Lin, her wonderful book about who's minding our kids, how we're using what we've discovered about neuroscience, including prejudice and hatred and emotion, and using technology to make it much worse for very narrow political reasons. Have you looked at that? And I'd like to follow up, given your history, Ms. Shipman, in your career, about how things have changed in that regard, about how people get information and how it's manipulated as we, as a culture and a civilization, try to figure out what the guardrails are and the damage it causes in the meantime. Start with you, Professor.
This is a question for me, right,
no,
sir?
First for you. Have you looked at social media
Yes.
and how people get information?
Congressman, it is very important that you raise that issue, because one of the most frustrating aspects of this is that people are posting anonymously, and they are posting absolutely horrible, horrible things. And so there are frustrations for all of us in trying to figure out how to stop that. But more fundamentally, we are very mindful of the destructive aspect of this hate speech on social media.
And it's not organic in many ways. It's deliberately directed by people who want to divide people and create problems. Have you looked at that? And I'm thinking of a book, The Chaos Machine, by a New York Times reporter, who was the person who actually reported that YouTube was directing adolescent girls right to the point where they could be, through their depression and anxiety, to show them how to commit suicide. So this is being used in these political environments, is my point right now.
It's very troubling, yes.
Shipman, and the point that it's not organic, that it's quite people in Russia or people in the United States doing this to people to divide us, as opposed to your career or how it's evolved from your career.
I have a lot of thoughts about this, so I'm just trying to gather my thoughts. I think this is an issue that our university has been investigating for a long time in terms of the science, the neuroscience, the flow of information at our journalism school. We have so many ways to look at this in an important way for our society. I know we're working with a Nobel Prize winner, Maria Ressa, on this issue right now of disinformation. But I'll say a couple of things. I think the most fundamental thing I've learned in my time on the board at Columbia is that, and this is from our incredible Mind-Brain Behavior Institute, which is just cutting-edge neuroscience, when people feel fear and intimidation, they can't learn. And so I think I come back to the topic of this hearing, that we can look at all of the reasons why there's certainly new ways we all hate each other in our society right now that are distressing. But I think if we cannot provide fundamental safety for our students, we now know, we're not just guessing, that we're not allowing them to learn.
And I wonder if you have any comments or observations.
Congressman, you are absolutely right that social media is part of the problem of, and on this particular issue, we have seen it as pernicious. I am particularly uncomfortable with some of the anonymous channels, things like side chat. Every student I meet, I tell them, please get off side chat, it's poisonous. And probably the most egregious cases that we've seen of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racist comments have been on social media, on those anonymous channels, and we would welcome any improvement in content moderation, which would reduce that.
No, I really appreciate that. I'm struck by this in the previous hearing, that I wonder what Brandeis and Holmes would be talking about if they were alive today. And their context of very similar economic and world strife time in World War I, where when they were discussing what is free speech and screaming fire in a crowded theater, I see the social media companies and technology companies as being those folks who are benefiting from strife. And this is sort of an extreme example of how they're monetizing us fighting against one another in a very, very difficult position where I think we would all agree that hatred and prejudice cannot be tolerated. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. DeSaulnier. Mrs. McLean, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here today to discuss this very, very important topic. But I think we have to go back to the beginning, and we have to identify the problem before we can really figure out the problem. So I want to start with you, Dr. Shafiq. What is your definition of anti-Semitism?
For me personally, any discrimination against people for their Jewish faith is anti-Semitism.
Okay, I appreciate that. You set up a task force. Do they share that same definition?
Congress, the chair of our task force is sitting next to me.
I know, but you're the president. I'd like to hear from you first.
I'm happy to answer the question, but I know he would also
and I'm
probably
happy
have
to do
much
that,
to
but
add.
I'd like to start with you, since you are the president,
Yes.
right? You own, the buck stops with you, right?
Completely.
Do they share that same definition?
I'm pretty sure that they would share that definition.
Don't you think that would be a pretty important thing to start with?
Yes.
Okay. Are you concerned at all about the article by Sharon Otterman, which indicated that a Columbia University task force set up to combat anti-Semitism on the week of October 7th, Hamas attack, is attempting to avoid one of the most contentious issues in universities' debate over the war? Its members, this is, now I don't know if it's true or not, so I'd like to get your take. Its members have refused to settle on what the definition of anti-Semitism is. So, from your opinion, this is an inaccurate article?
Yes, and
okay, thank you.
Professor Shizer would be the best person to give you
I appreciate that.
the details.
So, Professor, thank you. Do you have a definition of anti-Semitism?
Absolutely.
Okay, can you share it with us?
Sure. It's bias against Jewish people, which can manifest as ethnic slurs, stereotyping, Holocaust denial, double standards as applies to Israel, and anti-Semitic tropes.
Wonderful. I appreciate that. So this article is in fact false.
It is inaccurate, yes.
Okay, thank you. I think we need to really take a look at the facts. So now that we have a clear, defined definition of what it is, what I'm curious now is what are the consequences to one's actions? Ms. Shafiq, Dr. Shafiq, can you share with us what the consequences are?
The consequences for anti-Semitic behavior.
I'm sorry?
The consequence for anti-Semitic behavior.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So we have, one of the biggest things we focused on is we want to make it easy so that if there is any anti-Semitic incident at Columbia, we know about it immediately. We have QR codes all over the campus.
Okay.
We have a hotline. We have a single
And what
website
is,
for
and that's
reporting.
that's a great, I'm looking for an answer though.
Yeah.
What are the consequences for anti-Semitic behavior?
Yes. So once we know of an incident, we have investigative capacity. We've invested hugely in expanding that investigative capacity.
Okay.
And depending on the nature of the incident, there are consequences ranging from people being potentially suspended, being forced to get educated and trained about anti-Semitism.
Wonderful. And we've executed those.
So we are executing those, yes.
So my question to you, are mobs shouting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, or long live the Infantata, are those anti-Semitic comments?
When I hear those terms, I find them very upsetting. And I have heard...
That's a great answer to a question I didn't ask, so let me repeat the question. When mobs or people are shouting from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free, or long live the Infantata, are those anti-Semitic statements? Yes or no? It's not how you feel, it's...
I hear them as such. Some people don't. We have sent a clear message.
So is that yes?
We have sent a clear message to our community.
I'm not asking about the message. Yeah. Is that fall under definition of anti-Semitic behavior? Yes or no? Why is it so tough?
Because it's a difficult issue because
I
some
realize it's a
people hear
difficult
it as
issue,
anti-Semitic,
but here's
other
the
people
problem:
do not.
is when people can't answer a simple question and they have a definition, but then they can't. Well, I'm not really sure if that qualifies.
So
I'm asking a simple question. Maybe I should ask your task force: does that qualify as anti-Semitic behavior? Those statements, yes or no? Yes. Okay. Do you agree with your task force?
Yeah, we agree. The question is
yes,
what.
So the question.
what
So
to do
yes,
about
you
it.
do agree that that is anti-Semitic behavior, and there should be some consequences to that anti-Semitic behavior. We're in agreement. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I yield my time.
Yes.
The gentlewoman yields. Pursuant to the previous order, the chair declares the committee in recess, subject to the call of the chair, but we do plan to reconvene in 5 minutes. I ask all the guests to remain convene and come to order following our recess. Mr. Bowman, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. You know, as we all aim to fight and end anti-Semitism once and for all, there is language and there are actions and incidents that take place that are clearly anti-Semitic. And then there are others where someone may have said something or done something that they didn't quite understand, that was wrong. And what I'm hearing from students and people in my district who go to Columbia is they feel that there's not the space for divergent opinions or thoughts as it relates to the state of Israel or what's happening in Gaza right now. Can you speak to how different points of view or perspectives as it relates to the war in Gaza, criticism of the state of Israel, or something like that, that is not anti-Semitic, but just a difference of opinion from other students? How is that adjudicated or confronted? How are we creating spaces for critical dialogue and discussion that may make people feel uncomfortable, but are not like hateful? Can you speak to that first, Madam President? And then we could just go down the line and everyone gives brief comments to that.
Congressman, it's a very good point. We launched at the end of last semester a program called Dialogue Across Difference to do exactly what you're saying, which is to give people tools to have difficult conversations where people disagree but are respectful. And so there have been maybe 2 to 3 events per week at Columbia for students and for faculty.
You said per week?
Yes.
Okay.
To practice that sort and model that sort of behavior.
And are those events well attended by students with different points of view coming together and having this dialogue?
That is happening more. I will be candid with you that immediately after October 7th, the atmosphere was tense.
It was very hard. Yeah.
But that's changing, and I'm doing it myself personally in my listening sessions with students from both sides of the issues. And again, those have been very emotional.
Okay.
I've had students in tears in those sessions.
Of course. Can we go down quickly? I know I don't have much time. Can we just quickly respond to that? Yep.
Thank you for the question. We are committed to ensuring that students can articulate competing points of view about extremely important issues like the Middle East, like the current war, like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And it would be a really, really unfortunate thing and a departure from our mission as a university if we were suppressing points of view. We absolutely don't want to do that. And at the same time, we have free speech. We also have the responsibility not to engage in discrimination.
Of course. Now, the time is moving, so I'm going to let you answer, but I'm going to shift slightly. How are we also fighting other forms of hate, including Islamophobia at the university, which I've heard is happening also at the university as well? Can you two quickly respond to that?
We have, look, we're listening to all of our students. All hate is just, should not be welcome at Columbia. I've personally met with a large number of Jewish students and a lot of our Muslim students from the region who do feel stressed and scared about walking to class. I mean, we have to, And we have to allow for political debate, as Professor Shizer said. That's a bedrock of our democracy. I spent 5 years living in the Soviet Union. I can tell you, you don't want no political debate.
Right.
You don't want the result of that. But we can't let political debate cross into hate.
Never.
We have a
Yes.
special job as an educational institution.
Absolutely. Mr. Greenwald.
All hate is abhorrent. Further, the lessons that we're learning coming out of the task force, those principles will be applicable not just to anti-Semitism, but to other forms of hate as well.
Absolutely. Just to ensure that there are additional voices part of this conversation, I want to enter for the record, I have a letter here from over 600 faculty, staff, students, parents, and alumni of Columbia and Barnard expressing their commitment to open, honest inquiry on campus. I ask unanimous consent to enter the letter into the record.
Without objection.
And in the last 15 seconds that I have, Madam President, can you respond to there was a so-called chemical attack on campus at one point targeting so-called pro-Palestinian students. Can you quickly respond to that?
It appears to have been an odorous substance that was sprayed on demonstrators. The individuals involved have been suspended from Columbia.
Suspended from the school so they no longer attend the school, the students who
Correct.
were involved?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And I yield back.
Thank you. Mrs. Steele, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. For over 2 decades, Columbia's Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies Department has been extremely hostile to Israel and Jewish students. Professor Joseph Massad, who vocally praised Hamas, Professor Hamid Dabashi, who has made numerous anti-Semitic remarks, including that Israelis have a vulgarity of character and that is bone deep and structured to the skeletal I can't even pronounce vertebrae of its culture. And Rashid Khalidi, a professor of your university now and former PLO spokesperson, called Columbia Anti-Semitism Task Force bigots and fanatics and right-wingers and extremists. This is all on the record. And do you think this kind of conduct is appropriate and acceptable? And what university took, what kind of action that you took after these professors were talking about like this? Yes.
Congresswoman Steele, thank you for that question. Before I answer it, I know Representative Hayes asked me to confirm in writing about ongoing investigations of some of the faculty that you've described. So I just wanted to confirm now that both Professors Massad and Frankie are currently under investigation for discriminatory remarks. So I just wanted to put that on the record for this occasion. On the broader point that you raise, what I would say is that...
Just before you go that, how about the other 2 professors?
I'm going to come to that.
So all 3 of them.
Sorry, which ones are you referring to?
So it's a Professor